Welcome to the Public Works Nerds Podcast with Mark and Mike.
Well, good morning, guys. I really appreciate the opportunity to be here.
Thanks for being here, Mark. So today we have Mark Ray with us, Public Works Director at the City of Crystal in Minnesota. Mark, could you just give us a kind of 60-second overview of kind of what you do day to day and maybe a little background on the City of Crystal?
Well, very much appreciate being here, Mike and Mark, and glad to be part of this podcast. And, my career in public works started at a very young age, just shoveling neighbors' homes and just kind of that interest in public service and making a difference. I actually remember shoveling out catch basins as a kid to get proper drainage. So it's clearly ingrained in my system. And so, going up through college, I knew I wanted to get into civil engineering, and fortunately, that's kind of how things have played out. So for me, on a day-to-day basis, my job right now as a public works director, city engineer, is really just making sure that my staff, kind of setting a general direction, getting my staff the resources they need, and then quite frankly, just getting out of their way and letting them do the job and serve the residents of the city. And so that's kind of the big core of my focus, is just making sure that we're being diligent about work plans and that all the data is there. So we're not trying to scramble to figure out, wait, who's doing what or how are we funding something, that everything's squared away so the focus and the energy is put on delivering for our residents every day.
Can you tell us a little bit about the City of Crystal? Just a little demographic.
Yeah, so the City of Crystal, we are within the inner core of the Minneapolis-St. Paul suburbs, 5.8 square miles, about 23,000 people. From a public works standpoint, we have about 90 miles, centerline miles of city street, roughly the same of water, sewer, and stormwater pipes. On the given day, we were actually mostly a residential community. So we have a lot of people that go elsewhere. And so our commercial district is fairly small and concentrated. So we're very different in that respect, that we are so heavy on the residential. And the reason I think that's interesting is that when COVID hit, there's all this work from home thing, but there was never a conversation of like, well, can the infrastructure handle everybody working from home? And I think that's really a testament to the work that public works crews have done across the country. People never were concerned about the water coming to their home, the wastewater being carried away and treated, and stormwater management. And so as people were staying at home, I think Public Works had a critical role in making sure that continued to happen.
Yeah, there were a lot of conversations about broadband and capacity there, but yeah, there weren't those questions about all of a sudden now we've got a lot more flushes during the middle of the workday that we didn't see historically.
And just to reiterate, that was never a concern, right? We knew the system could handle it, but it was just funny how it's one of those things that we've done a good job. We've built that trust with the community, and so there was literally never really a thought or a concern that we would not be able to provide. I don't know about other people listening to this, but I know for us, we saw our water usage change in terms of the trends. It became more flatlined across every day. But overall usage actually for us didn't change, even though we're more, because we saw our residential go up, but our commercial went down. And so the net effect was fairly equal. So that was kind of just a little interesting trivia fact that we saw as things played out.
Yeah. As we get into the actual topic here for today of emergency management, why don't you talk about how you got involved in emergency management, how it kind of became a specialty for you?
So I've always been passionate about public service, as I kind of alluded to, and who doesn't like lights and sirens, right? So when we, my wife and I moved up here after college, I actually was a reserve St. Louis Park police officer, which is just a volunteer role for a number of years, really to learn more about that side of things. But I saw a lot of opportunity for how Public Works can support police and fire, and I thought the best way was to kind of see it from their side and try to bridge that gap. And so that really helped, was a great experience, learned a lot, made a difference in the community. Then the opportunity presented itself for me to join APWA's Emergency Management Committee. That led to an opportunity with the National Homeland Security Consortium representing APWA, which then led to being able to apply and get into the Naval Postgraduate School for one of their executive leaders programs, which then led to now I'm actually starting a program in Harvard later this year on some crisis management stuff. So it's funny how a whole bunch of little decisions have really built over the years, but it's been amazing. It's been great. It's been fun, and it's fun.
Do we need to get you a sport coat with some elbow pads on it for the whole Harvard thing?
I don't. I've been getting a lot of you don't say grief on that, but some comments that going to change the way I talk. So no, I think is the answer for right now.
Okay.
What surprised you? What kind of changed for you working for the police force? That's so unique.
I think the biggest thing that public works professionals need to understand is the police and fire, and EMS are really just like the public in terms of their understanding of public works. They don't necessarily know all the resources that we can provide in our experience in responding to situations. And so that was one of the big educational things that I've learned that's a need there is there's this unfortunate tendency of like, well, if you have a problem you can't figure out, you just call 911 and things will happen, right? And I think and this is not just public works, this is a broad statement, there's a lot of applications in that. But from a public works perspective, where that's really helped drive me is how do we be intentional about reaching out to police, fire, EMS, whoever, our peers, with the resources we can provide. Something as simple as a crash scene. We in public works do traffic control. That's what we do. We have technology and equipment to help support providing scene security at a simple crash scene. So instead of having a squad out there with lights on, maybe we put a truck out there with a message board, and some traffic control, some cones to make that scene safer, because we know traffic incidents are dangerous things. Or simple things like one of the biggest gains we've had is just simply going for ride-alongs with officers and just talking to them and saying, what questions do you have? What things do you see? Hey, there's this street light out. Hey, what is this project? Hey, can you tell me about this? One of the things we do in the city of Crystal with new officers is I give them a tour. We go to our lift stations. We go to our reservoir. And I say, hey, if you see somebody in this space, I need you to understand how big of a potential deal that is because of what this critical infrastructure is. Provide that educational opportunity there, and just kind of help bring them along with the cool stuff that we do.
On the flip side, have the police department, the fire department, or your lens from working with the police, do they bring things that you've taught your guys?
Well, it's absolutely a two-way partnership. And so one of the cool things we do that I'm so grateful for is if we're out in a busier road, I'll get a hold of an officer like, hey, do you want to come run some traffic control in our work zone? And just support our staff being out there to help slow some speeds down and improve some driver awareness. Or things like you've all seen with dinosaur videos and providing some public education on crosswalk laws. And so just looking for opportunities to partner with law enforcement and fire to do education.
Yeah, and
fire safety videos, for example.
And if you didn't catch that, Mark Ray did say dinosaur videos, such as the crosswalk laws. And if somebody wanted to find that
City of Crystal YouTube page is where they're all at.
City of Crystal YouTube page. And yes, that is Mark Ray in the dinosaur suit teaching people about crosswalk laws, both from the driver's perspective and the pedestrian side.
We actually literally go through, so the way that was done is I literally went line by line through state statute on pedestrians to really articulate the whole thing, because I think there's a lot of misperceptions out there on what the law says and how people should do it. It's been a really interesting experience trying to cross the street in a dinosaur suit from a number of different angles.
You touched on traffic control, getting the police to help with some traffic control. How receptive have they been to that? I don't want this to turn into let's throw public service.
I'm just going to go ahead and say this. The Crystal Police Department is probably one of the best departments in the state.
Yeah.
I'll commit to that comment. They've been great to work with.
Good.
And even just kind of creative ways to solve problems. So, for example, if there's speeding complaints, they could, in the past, go put a police car out there. Well, we have traffic tubes. Let's go out there, collect the data. Let's see where we're at, and then make an educated decision on if we're going to put an officer out there, when do we put them out there? What are they looking for? Or, hey, this street has 200 cars a day, and they're going 28 miles an hour. Right. This is probably not a best use of our resources. Right. And really trying to do that, decision and data-driven action.
As we talk about emergency management, there's a scalable approach to that. Talk through that from the small scale stuff up to the large scale stuff, and what you see your public works staff role in those events.
So I'm a big believer, and I would encourage anybody. This is you fight like you train. So whatever you do on your day to day, when things scale up and things get bad, you're going to fall back to that muscle memory. And there's a variety of reasons, physiologically why you fall back to there and just building the muscle memory. So for us in the City of Crystal, we really treat anything from a traffic accident to even a snow event as kind of a dress rehearsal. So for example, if we have a traffic crash in the City of Crystal, my street supervisor is alerted to it as soon as an officer is alerted to it. We have a truck that we've built out that has a message board, traffic cones, floor dry, debris pickup stuff. So he responds out there to provide traffic support at the incident as well as clean up the debris. We've gotten to the point where if there is a crash where their vehicles need to be towed, we don't generally have the debris picked up by the time the tow truck arrives. So when that tow hooks them and leaves, we all just leave the scene. And that sounds really good from an incident management standpoint too. But the other thing to think about too is like water quality, right? We're getting this junk that could wash into the storm sewer or plug catch basins off the road. And so that's, again, a really subtle way that Public Works has a resource that people would never think about, an application you never think about, but it does make a difference. Scaling it up to, let's say, a plow event. We have 800 megahertz radios, so we can all communicate. The reason we do that, and we've made that investment, is situational awareness and training the guys to be comfortable with the radios, to use them to communicate, to listen. So, for example, as people finish their plow routes, they're saying, hey, I'm getting done. Who needs more? Or, quite frankly, with some of the snow events, hey, I'm stuck. Can somebody come pull me out? And because we're using the radios, there's that situational awareness. That's also great because when the big storm hits, radios are a much better way to have that situational awareness. Or if things go really bad and cell service goes down, we've already built the muscle memory of using the radios. And so this isn't a shock to our system. We're already ready for it. We can keep moving. So that's, as you look at the continuum, that's how we're really setting up for, is not only what is the best way for situational awareness, but if cells go down, well, then what do you do? We're covered from that. And theoretically with the radios, even if the trunking system goes down, there's a backup way you can do that still uses the radio. And so really, we're trying to introduce layers of communication and resiliency and redundancy, but working that into what we consider more normal: traffic crashes, water main breaks, plowing snow.
I don't want to spend a lot of time on this, but I just want to back up a little bit to something you said about the 800 megahertz system and a trunking backup. So how does that work? Is that more of a radio to radio?
Yep, exactly. So if you're in Minnesota, there's an Armor 800 megahertz system. So basically the way it works is your radio is really a computer. So you key up the mic, it says, hey, I need a channel, it grabs a frequency, goes to a tower, then goes to the neighboring radio. If that system were to go down, you can switch over to some other talk groups that would be direct radio to radio.
More like
Obviously, the reach would be
CB
smaller.
type of radio. Type
Exactly.
Of thing. Yeah.
The range would be smaller, but functionally, that's still a capability. And so the way we see it is we kind of have 3 layers deep for emergency communications.
Yeah. Do you have the equipment in even your normal pickup trucks, or is it just
We are portable, so it's all handheld radio. Okay. And the reason for that is, one, it's easy to switch in and out.
Yeah.
The radios are very expensive, and so having one permanently tied to a vehicle is probably not the best application.
Got it.
And for Public Works guys, yes, we're in the trucks plowing snow, but we're also not in the trucks.
Yep.
Chopping trees, jetting sewers, doing stuff like that. And so really having that application is as wide as possible is important.
I had when I was Public Works Director at Roseville, I had my handheld in the office, and it was always interesting to listen to the radio chatter, some of it more amusing than others. But and the police have their own dedicated bands on that 800 megahertz system, and fire too, I'd imagine. But so
Technically, talk groups is how they're called, and that's the big thing too. And I would offer anybody leading this is, I carry mine on me all the time. I take it home with me, and so, for example, if we have a storm system coming into the metro, I will jump on and a shout out to the Crystal Police and West Metro Fire again, is they've allowed us to have their kind of car to car informal talk groups in our radios. So I will jump on the talk group and just say, hey, I'm monitoring. If something goes wrong, you can get a hold of me on the radio. So what does that mean for them? It means for them, they don't need to look up my number in the phone to call me if something happened. They know they can just key it up, call for me, and go from there. And the best example of that is a tornado we had August 14th, I think, of 2020. The first reported tornado in the city of Crystal's history. We saw the band come in, and so I got on the radio like 45 minutes before it even got into the metro. I'm like, hey, there's storms on the way. Just want to let you know I'm monitoring this channel if you need anything. Storm came in. I saw my phone blow up with tornado alerts. The cops got on. Mark, we got hit. There's wires down. And all I said was, all right, I'm bringing everybody. And that's all he needed. And then from there, we scaled up. I went over to the West Metro Fire, which is where our EOC is. As we were bringing in guys, they were grabbing radios because that's the muscle memory we've developed. Mm-hmm. We assemble them into groups. So we've learned we have a traffic control group, just putting basically cones out on trees with wires in them because we're not touching that. We have debris clearance out that are the guys pushing the trees out of the road to get that open for emergency access. And then we've also learned that we have, if there's some street flooding, we have a crew that can clear catch basins because as we all know, as vegetative debris falls out, it can plug catch basins. So it's kind of that divide and conquer. Then I had a supervisor out just doing a damage assessment. And we very quickly realized that where we were hit was a very narrow band. And it was in an oddly straight line. And so we knew relatively quick, like something wasn't right here. And so we ended up reaching out to the National Weather Service and like, hey, I think we might have had a thing here. And so they sent a survey crew the next day, and it was an EF0, thankfully. So it was a lot of nothing. But it was a great experience and kind of just that confirmation of you fight like you train. And when that day happened, I'm proud of how we responded.
So I want to dive into that incident management thing here in a bit, but first I want to back up to the smaller events and that and ask, do you have like specialty equipment or vehicles or trailers or anything else like that you use for those smaller events?
So again, you fight like you train, right?
Yep.
So we already talked about the radios. We've also built out a trailer that carries all of our traffic control. So it has barricades, plastic barricades, type 3 barricades, cones, and some advanced warning stuff. So that's always set, ready to go. It's great on the day-to-day because the guys can hook up and go. If they have a job, it's all set to go. And the cool thing is you pull it out to deploy it, and then you put it back when you're done. And so you're not double handling stuff, and then you park it. So for our response to wires down, they just grab the trailer. They have a boatload of cones they can put out. On the on the utility side, we actually just built a custom trailer that's a 26-foot trailer. It has a trench box and plate tamper on the back. And in the front end, it actually has an enclosed area that carries all of our parts for water main breaks, but really just stuff in general. It's also heated. So our staff have a place to be inside heated. But we took two different things and combined it into one with this trailer. And I think that's the important thing of, again, just what is the most efficient way in terms of just trucking stuff back and forth, and how can you be intentional in that? So those are just two little examples of things we've done to deck out some equipment that's used every day, and then if things scale up, we're ready to rock and roll.
Yeah, we have a similar. We took an old ambulance and outfitted it as like our water utility management vehicle or something. We had an acronym. I can't remember what it was.
We call ours the URT. It's the Underground Utility Response Vehicle.
Yeah, I like that.
Team?
I like that.
I don't know, trailer? I think that's what it is.
But the key
Has
is,
to have an acronym. If it doesn't have an acronym, it is not official.
and it's not a public works thing, right? But for us, obviously the vast majority of our water main breaks, and we would see anywhere from 25 to 40 in a year. The vast majority of those are in really bad cold weather, in the wintertime. And so, like you said, it was really important to have that heated space for the guys to get into.
Yeah, and before they were just kind of climbing into trucks during the downtime. And so now we have a communal space where they can talk and they can gather. We also have all the equipment right there.
Right. Good. So let's get into like the larger like incident management and how you prepared yourself and your staff for that incident management. You mentioned the EOC acronym, the Emergency Operations Center, but just kind of talk about that space, that part of it, and how Crystal has prepared themselves for incident management.
Well, first of all, I think the biggest thing too is people hear the term Emergency Operations Center and they just think, whoa, this is a big thing and like must be the end times. And really, you need to kind of tamp down those expectations. So in the city of Crystal, what we do is, look, if we know we're going to have a multi, police, well, really more just even fire and public works response, I go to West Metro Fire and they have a little room and that's where we start it. And so we built that muscle memory, even for the small stuff. And so you could call it EOC, but it's really just fire command staff and myself in there communicating. And so at the most basic level, I'd say, don't let acronyms or terms scare you from doing things or saying like, oh, this isn't that. We don't need to do that. The real thing to think about is just like who's involved, how we can get the right people into the right space so they can communicate, right? You can call it whatever you want, incident command post or EOC or whatever, but keep that aspect in mind. As far as how we train for that, it kind of goes back to the you fight like you train comment. So if you are at a crash scene, my expectation of my staff is you will make contact with law enforcement there, whoever the ranking officer is, and just touch base, say, hey, what do you need? And just have that personal relationship. Go for ride-alongs to build that level of trust. As that scales up, if we have a special event, then we have a supervisor, myself, in the command post or whatever you want to call it, with the leadership of whoever else is there, police, fire, EMS. So if something goes bad, we're all in the same space. We can have the conversation and move forward. Then if it scales up again, where you're meeting it somewhere, again, whoever that, probably at that level, it's myself, going to that command post and having that information exchange. The most important thing is just hammering home getting all the people together. And if you want to get technical, it's called unified command. So you have all these different groups. You have kind of the most ranking person appropriate for that environment together, talking and sharing information. One of the things that is important is if we have a bad crash and we have to bring out a street sweeper, I really don't want the police to pull out their traffic control before our sweeper's gone through to get it clean, right? Because all of a sudden, if we're doing that under traffic, it becomes a whole different mess. And so just making sure that communication's happening of like, are you good? Okay, we're good. Okay, let's go. And just really staying on that same page. So it's really just hammering home that day-to-day communications and scaling it. And so that's how we've done it, right? We have prepared by having even some of my guys will go for ride-alongs with officers, having my leadership go ride-along for officers. I go out to lunch with the police chief and the fire chief and just really build that communication and that trust. So when things happen, there's that level of trust there. Because if you do not have that trust, you really don't have anything.
So you mentioned a couple of terms and acronyms in that, unified command, with the EOC, incident command and such. Where does that come from?
So if you want to get into the terms, I'd recommend any going just to look online for FEMA has some a variety of free training available on their website. So just Google free training, ICS training, Instant Command System training with FEMA. Okay. You can level out to the nerd level you want to on how far you want to go into that exactly.
And we'll link to these in the show notes too.
Yeah, sounds good. I think at the most basic level, everybody should know a little bit, right? To be dangerous. The most important thing I would say, if you remember nothing else when it comes to emergency management, is the idea of unified command, which is within Public Works, you still follow your normal chain of command, but at some level, your leadership of Public Works is standing next to police, is standing next to fire, is standing next to EMS, is standing next to emergency management. So they're all communicating so that there isn't duplication of effort. And then just understand there is really, when you approach a problem, that there is a kind of priority, right? So if there is an incident, your first is always life safety. What do you need to do to protect the people? Your second one is incident stabilization. How are you going to stop whatever's going bad from continuing to go bad? Then it's considering property damage, and then finally the environment. And so understanding that's how we approach stuff, that's how they approach stuff, and we need to think about that, which really, I don't think for Public Works we think about it that way, but it really is how we do. I mean, if you look at a water main break, we're like, what's the first thing we do with a water main break? You shut the water off, right? That's incident stabilization. Generally speaking, there's no life safety issues. Nobody's at risk of flooding or drowning, really, with a water main break. It conceivably could happen, but generally that's not the case. So that one's done. So you look at incident stabilization. Then you look at property impacts, stopping the flooding if it's a major water main break, which unfortunately we have some experience with. And then obviously the environmental impacts. If your water main break picks up some massive oil contamination, well, you have to deal with that. But you work the system: life, instant stabilization, minimize property damage, and then protect the environment.
So, what does the city of Crystal require? Like, what is your requirement for staff on the FEMA training levels?
So at this point, we are starting to roll out, and we've done this previously, is ideally we would take everybody to our kind of the ICS, 7, 800, and 100, kind of the most basic ones. Mm-hmm. The challenge with us is they're all web-based. And so we don't have enough computers to run everybody through it. And while it is a interface, a web-based system for training, I think, especially with Public Works staff, it's good to have it more, honestly, I'll call it a lecture, but more of a discussion about it. And so long term, what I would like to do is basically bring everybody to a large room that has a ton of computers and just go through it together. That's the approach I took in Golden Valley. And it worked quite well because it's not as intimidating when you have somebody there walking you through it. And that's, I think, one of the challenges we have with Public Works staff who, let's be honest, a lot of my guys don't log into a computer every day. Right. They're there to do the work, which is awesome, which is what is needed. but we need to acknowledge that
Yep.
and plan for that in the training side.
Yeah,
And so what we try to do really is, while we don't go through the FEMA training per se, it's to take those principles and apply them in the day-to-day and say, hey, this is why we're doing this. This is the method of the madness to provide that
Yeah,
context.
I think that's great because, of course, different people learn in different ways,
Right.
different methods, and by doing it that way, you're reinforcing it and giving people that information in a couple of different ways, and that's good. And it also builds that kind of team perspective
Right.
too on it.
Obviously, with supervisors, we try to get them through the higher level training stuff.
Do you do like mock events?
So we do, West Metro Fire does host some stuff because they're kind of the emergency management groups. We do have some trainings per year, which is good. But really, for me, it's trying to leverage those small things, your special events. I think that's a great opportunity for your special events, your city festivals, to like, hey, let's get some muscle memory on how you organize stuff. Like, okay, we have this crew that's out doing trash collection. We have another crew out dragging ball fields and painting. Well, you need to understand that that's actually following kind of that emergency response, right? You have a team doing this, you have a team doing that, and here's who they're reporting to and how that rolls up.
Yeah, you're really building a culture.
Yeah, you
Kinda
have
just
to.
day-to-day
absolutely.
action instead of just a one-off once a year go to some training.
Yep.
You're building it into everything you do.
Well,
and
it
it's-
has to be. I very much believe that culture eats policy for breakfast, and so we try to really obsess on culture. Whether it be the culture we want for just our staff as they come to work every day, or preparing that muscle memory for when the bad day happens.
Do you go back and kind of do an after incident debrief of, hey, we could have done this a little bit better. Hey, Joe's a new guy and he didn't quite know to grab the right trailer. Or, do you do
I would say a
stuff
lot of that's a lot more conversational based, depending on the scale of it. We don't go through an official after action report. That is probably something we quite frankly should do. But as we know, time is a thing, and for us with Public Works, it's
Yeah.
you got the cleanup, and then you got to get back to making normal happen. And so, it's a lot of conversation, usually informal conversation of like if there's certain issues or people we need to work on stuff. Yep, let's figure a way to make that happen. If it's more high level, like wow, we just missed the boat on this communication, and be talking with the other department heads of like what happened here, and like how can we be better, because I'm super competitive and I want us to be the best, and so we're gonna work to do that.
What do you think you and Crystal do differently than other folks, other public works guys you talk
Where
to?
I would tell you that where I think I would submit to you most public works departments beat is with our alerting system. So because of how awesome Crystal Police Department is, we have what's called active alerts, or that's a sales pitch for a company. But basically, as soon as Hennepin Dispatch enters in a call, if it is classified as certain things, as soon as an officer is assigned to that call, we get an alert on our phone.
Okay, so
And
it's part
so
of the
there is
system.
no delay. It is a baked in system. And so so that the officers don't have to then call us. And where I would say this is the reason why I'm so proud of this system is if there's a sewer backup, generally the protocol is the person will call 911. I have a sewer backup. That will get assigned to the police department, usually CSO, who then will probably call an on-call person who will then respond, right? All of this is time. Whereas now, if that person calls, as soon as that dispatcher hits enter and sends it, phones blow up on my on-call person, my supervisor, my phone. A whole bunch of people get an immediate alert that has the location, the description of the problem, the person's name and number. So we can immediately make contact with that homeowner and start moving the right things as potentially their basement is filling with sewage.
So what was that software package?
So Active Alert is the vendor we use. I want to stress there are a number of vendors out there. But it's really, that was a strong partnership with our law enforcement and with Hennepin Dispatch to make that happen, and we are better because of it.
What was the process like to implement that software? I assume there are workflows of, hey, sewer backup, here's the people in order who get connected.
So the way it works fundamentally on the dispatch side is whenever a call comes in, it's always classified as something. So the work went on our end of just like, well, if it's, these things, who gets alerted? So for us, it's if there's a debris call in the road, a sign or signal issue, utility backup, or car crashes are kind of the big ones, or hit deer actually are the big ones that we get flagged on. And then we've broken it down a little bit. So my utility staff will obviously get one of the utility calls, and some others will get like the sign signal issue. So for example, like a flashing red traffic signal, right? If that comes through, we'll say we'll take care of it. And usually for us, it's just notifying county transportation of like, hey, you got this issue. And
So did you sit down with the other department heads and go through each of these classifications? Okay. So I'm just trying to tease out what was the process
So the way
look
it started is the decision made, hey, we're going to use this alerting thing. And so all the officers have this on their phones, right? So they can see everything. And so it was like, hey, are you okay with us having access to this? And here's the filtered list of stuff we want. And it was stuff that we can provide support to. Okay. So yeah, I mean, I think the sewer backup one is the best one, or a water main break. So the way it comes through is a utility disruption, whether it's a sewer backup or water main break. So as soon as a call comes through of a water main break, I mean, as soon as that hits enter, we see it and we start marshaling resources to deal with it. And so you look at that life instant stabilization stuff, we're really trying to get as fast a response as possible.
Does the city, if somebody just called City Hall, would the person answering the phone use that same?
Nope, it only goes through dispatch. So if somebody were to call, a City Hall with like a utility backup, that would probably just get forwarded to the utility supervisors, how that would go.
Okay.
Our branding, though, is to say, hey, if you have a sewer backup, call 911, and that'll start the process.
Okay.
But yeah, I think that partnership with PD has really been good for a service to the community in terms of our ability to respond much faster. I think it's also in this whole conversation of, police being stretched too thin and all the different calls they go to. Well, we can kind of carve out this and we can marshal our resources to fill this, to free them up to do other stuff that's quite frankly probably a better use of their time. Because the reality is law enforcement cannot clear a sewer backup. That is not their jam, right?
Right.
They didn't get into it to respond to sewer backup calls. We did. And so let's make that as quick as possible for our ability to respond to that call.
Hey everyone, I just want to take a quick moment to thank our sponsor, Bolton & Mink, who is producing and editing our podcasts.
At Bolton & Mink, we believe all people should live in a safe, sustainable, and beautiful community. We promise every client two things. We'll work hard for you, and we'll do a good job. We take a personal interest in the work being done around us. And at the end of the day, we're real people offering real solutions.
Getting back into the larger scale events and such, there are things that, well, Crystal, like you say, you have you're a relatively small agency, and that's a different thing. I mean, it's an interesting component of the Twin Cities metro area. We have a lot of small first ring suburbs, which lead to some operational challenges when we talk about getting it, responding to larger scale events. So, how can agencies work together? What can we do to help each other in the, like, if that wasn't an F0, if it was an F3, sending up the bat signal for help, how does that work, and what do you do beforehand to be ready for that?
So as much as important is to build that muscle memory within your own staff, it's important to know your neighbors, right? People will say actually a first responder is your neighbor after a large incident, because the reality is it might be your neighbor trying to come dig you out of your house. And so one of the cool things with Public Works, right, is we work together all the time with these smaller cities, whether it might be a joint project or like, hey, our sewer jetter's down, can we borrow yours for this incident or whatever. One of the challenges with Public Works, we've been so good at that, is I think we have lost some perspective on like, hey, we should probably formalize some of this stuff, dot our I's, cross our T's when it comes to mutual aid things. So one of the things I had the privilege of is starting up the statewide Public Works mutual aid agreement back in 2018. And the reason for that was really, hey, we work together all the time. So let's codify this. Let's do it right instead of this handshake deal. The cool thing about this agreement is it acknowledges the fact that it covers your day-to-day as well as the emergency thing. And so it doesn't require your agency to declare an emergency. It might be just the way it's set up is it's just like basically one call, maybe a director to a director of like, hey, we need this. Are you good? I'm good. All right, send it. The other companion part of that, as we learned, is we also share just equipment without people. And so in working with the League of Minnesota Cities and the attorneys and insurance, is we realized that's actually considered a loan, an equipment loan. And so there's kind of a companion agreement to this mutual aid agreement that covers the sharing of equipment. And the idea is just to make it as simple and quick as possible to acknowledge the fact of what we do on a day-to-day basis. So from a preparedness standpoint, that's one thing that we have that's in motion. There's probably somewhere on the order of, I think, like 50 agencies that have joined the mutual aid agreement. So if you have any questions, reach out to me. I can get you the information, no cost. But really, it's an acknowledgement of what you are probably doing every day.
So let's link to that in the show notes too, because this is going to be a national podcast.
Yep.
Were there any sticking points, contentious points going through building this agreement?
So I think the biggest thing is always just the legal side, right?
The attorneys.
And
Those darn
it was
attorneys.
the attorneys and workers' comp, right? Because we do not do a job that is inherently always safe, and there are some challenges there. And so how do you plan for that stuff? And luckily, there's a lot of templates out there. We worked off them. League was great to work with. The other big thing, quite frankly, is, and this is my challenge to Public Works people listening to this, is what we have done has worked. And I think there's a complacency that comes with that. And we need to acknowledge that we need to be better. And one of the ways of being better is to formalize some of those processes, to have the mutual aid agreement done. It is put in place to acknowledge the fact that we try to work fast. It is not intended to be this huge paperwork process. It is more to cover the insurance, the what if somebody gets hurt, and just how do you share stuff between cities. And so it's structured very simply like the council will say this person is authorized to make decisions on sending mutual aid, requesting mutual aid, sending equipment, or receiving equipment. And who cities have designated for that, it varies widely. And it can be multiple people too. So it's, again, very easy, but it's the right way to do it. And let's not be complacent. Even though what we've done has worked, let's not get complacent in that.
Kind of similar along those lines, I was wondering, and you made the statement, you've got your little catchphrase of culture eats policy for lunch or for breakfast.
Probably all of them, to be
all
honest.
Of them, yeah. It's hungry. But what policies should, a community look to put in place to, beyond the mutual aid thing, but internally, like what kind of policies do you think should be in place to help in this area?
So I think the biggest thing when it comes to just emergency response is cities need to remove whatever structural barriers are there to provide that response. We got into this business to serve our communities. What is holding us back for that? And so I'm not going to say there's any certain policies, because that varies based on the size of your city, based on the level of your government. But really look at what is the core function of what you try to do and what can make you do that faster or more efficiently. And whatever's impeding that, I would challenge you to look at that, reflect on it, and say, what can we do to make this better?
Do you have a rhythm? I mean, I love that. I certainly applied that through my business career too. Do you have a rhythm method for slowing yourself down, pausing, reflecting on making those improvements? Because it's so easy. The day-to-day is so fast. It's hard to carve out the time and focus to do that.
So I would take a step back. I think one of the big things in my role as a director is to, as I said, the care and feeding of my team, who is the ones that deliver the services. And so for me, it's trying to look at things of like, where are there policies, where are there procedures that impeded our ability to respond? So for me, it's a lot of just self-reflection. Okay. And then it's like, well, if I see something, then it's having the conversation, hey, whoever, supervisor, staff, this is what I perceive. Help. What did you see? What was this your experience? Am I completely wrong here? One of the things I tell people is like, look, I don't have to be right all the time. I have a big ego. I get that. My job is not to be right. My job is to make sure the right thing happens. And so that's asking questions. That's removing barriers, whatever, to make that right thing happen. And so I think for me, it starts with some self-reflection and just asking like, hey, this seemed like it worked well, but did I miss something? What was your experience? And then having a conversation and dealing with the policy or whatever accordingly.
Along the lines of the mutual aid agreement in that, during my tenure as the Public Works Director at Roseville, I was working with you on a fence consortium. And, a really innovative idea, and it took reimagining within our operations on how that would work and things like that. But why don't you talk about that, how it started, how that got going, and where that is today?
Yeah, so about 2 years ago, I was approached by the Hennepin Chiefs Association. I had worked with the previous president, and the current president was the chief in Crystal. And what we learned through some of the incidents that had happened is anti-scale fencing is not readily available here in Minnesota. The nearest location comes from Chicago. And so there's a time factor there. Also, just making sure it's available can be a challenge, and it's very expensive. And so the question was, how can we have this fencing closer? And I think I should take a step back. The important thing with this fencing is the idea of the fencing is to allow the First Amendment to take place, to people to express their constitutional rights. This is not intended to be a barrier from that. What it is intended to do is to allow people to protest and not have agitators come into that, hijack that experience for whatever reason, because they're there to burn something down, break something, whatever. Let the protesters protest. The fencing provides the barrier so that the people who are there to be agitators and destructive, they can't do what it is. The protesters are allowed just to protest. And there's a variety of things that come with that, right? If you have the fence up, because you have that separation, you hopefully can have the police maybe not even visible, out of sight, which is consistent with a lot of best practices from a variety of groups that are out there. And so realizing the value in the fence in de-escalation, and one of the terms we came up with is the great de-escalator, is that we create that space for people to protest and express their constitutional rights. So that was the goal, was how do we do this? And so we had conversations, we had a working group, we had police, fire, emergency management, and public works coming together, talking about ways. And ultimately what that led to is the formation of this consortium, which we have 32 members now currently, which is basically we've contracted with a vendor. They have a certain amount of fencing stored here in the metro. If there is an event where there could be a threat to buildings, where agitators would want to kind of hijack a protest, this fence would be deployed by public works staff in a very quick manner to protect the building so that the protests could happen and not be hijacked. And so I'm very proud of that. I think it's a great testament to the creativity, and I think it's also really a response to a local need and trying to get that done. I'm not aware of anybody else doing this in the country, and
Right.
so
And nobody's used this yet, right?
nobody's used it yet. Well, I mean,
activated.
we're only coming online now.
Yeah.
We started 2 years ago, which is lightning fast in local government world, but but fundamentally what it is if there's an incident, we have a plan in place to provide anti-scale fencing around, generally speaking, police departments who are the members of this.
You know, from my perspective, from my experience on that, I was a little skeptical on it at first, you know, and particularly on some of the responsibilities and identifying staff to erect the fencing and this, that, and the other. But ultimately, it was a really great exercise for us to sit down and talk about what would we do, you know, and to your point in there is identifying a place for the protesters to exercise their First Amendment right. You know, let's identify a spot that's safe for them, safe for the public, but is still here, you know, at City Hall or near City Hall, where they can still be visible to the media and this, that, and the other. So it made us kind of think about that and plan for that. So if something does happen, and we all hope it doesn't, but if something did happen, you know, we'd be ready. Not only we'd have the fencing available, but we've got a plan,
Right.
you know, to implement.
Well, that's the big thing too. Is I really, you know, there's a couple different, I would say, oppositions to this. But one of like, well, you're creating this separation by the fence, and that is true. We are absolutely creating a separation. Yep. But if the alternative is a skirmish line of officers, that's not good for anybody.
Right.
From a PTSD, from a just dialogue, from a resources consumption standpoint, there's a lot that goes into that. And so how can we reduce that demand on that local government and all the mutual aid agencies that are coming in to support that effort? And so that was kind of part of this too, is the fence is intended to be a de-escalator. And I really want to just stress that it's to create the space for protesters to protest and for people who want to cause damage and destruction to not be able to do that, and to distract from the point of the protest, which is the constitutionally protected right.
So just mechanism, the fencing stored offsite at a vendor. A city calls the vendor, and do they truck the fencing in then?
Nope. There's a process in place. The police chief would have to make the request, and I'm not going to go into details on how that works, but there is basically a process where that local chief would make a call, and that would start a ball in motion to get fencing put up.
Okay.
Great. Did you have anything else you wanted to add about, just emergency management in general, or?
Well, I think the biggest thing is one of the cool things about Public Works is there are so many different things you can do. For me, emergency management is my passion. If emergency management is not your passion, that is totally cool. But at least know a little bit. At least maybe do some basic classes, just do some Googling, do a ride along, just learn a little bit, because it does absolutely apply to the day-to-day job, and it can make you better at your job. If you want to go further, there is a ton of resources out there. Reach out to me, reach out to your local fusion center. FEMA has options. There's a ton of options out there, and quite frankly, most of them are free. And so definitely take advantage of that too, because what we do matters. What we do makes a difference. And as I say, we make normal happen. And so when normal's not happening, we have a big role in getting it back to there. And so we need to own that. I would say the final thing, if you really are not like, I don't want to do that, is as Public Works, we really have a duty to respond. And we talk about mindset. And so if you were driving down the road and you see like even a traffic signal in flashing red mode, even if that's not your city, own that problem. Own the impact that has on the community and call somebody. If you are not the person to respond, that's okay. But then notify the people that need to respond. And so I hope, if nothing else, people leave with that idea of, I need to own the space because I am a professional. That if I'm not the person to deal with this, I'm going to notify the right people to deal with this. And even that basic approach will make us better and is a public service.
Yeah, because we do have a trained eye. Like we do know when something isn't working correctly, and not the average person might not know that. And even the public safety space may not know that, but
it's
we
even
know
who to
that.
call,
so,
right? I know based on where a signal is, like there are different people, different agencies own different signals. And so there's that experience that we have.
Yep. But even at a minimum, you can always call 911 and get something rolling.
Yeah, I mean, I think that's good. I want to say caution this, but just always keep in mind, right, then there's some other layers too. So challenge yourself to learn a little more about the neighborhood you're in.
That was a really great conversation on emergency management, Mark. Thank you for that, and I hope our listeners learned a lot. They should. And as Mike indicated through this, we'll have some links in our show notes for a lot of stuff that we talked about. We'll make sure we have some links to the FEMA resources as well on that. So as we get to the tail end of the podcast here, I just wanted to Mike and I have a couple of questions that we're going to ask all of our guests, and just kind of talking a little bit about technology in Public Works. And so just kind of an open-ended question of, for you and your experience at Golden Valley and Crystal or wherever, where have you seen technology like really help you out? Where has it really worked for you and been a big
I would
success?
say the biggest thing to me in pondering this question is really the smartphone, right? In terms of just your ability to FaceTime, to see real things in real time, to make decisions, your ability to access record drawings and information. And when I say smartphone, I'll include tablets in that. Texting for information sharing, group messaging. I mean, to me, I think the cell phone has been the biggest step. However, it's also created a crutch, right? Because if you lose cell service, what does that mean for your organization? So we circle that back to emergency management. And it's like, okay, we are absolutely more efficient because of smartphones. But when that bad day happens, what's the plan?
Yeah. You got to make sure you have a computer that's got all the as-built loaded into it. You can take out in the field, things like that. Yep.
That phone does not just become a really expensive paperweight.
Yep.
On the flip side, are there technologies, software, equipment, whatever, that just if you could wave your magic wand, you would improve? Like, what falls short?
Well, I think the biggest challenge that I've seen out there is, we kind of touched on this earlier, is just asset management. And the amount of data you can gather now is unbelievable. But so what? What do you do with that data? How does that data drive your decision-making process? And the other question is, how much work do you have to put in to make that data actionable?
Yep.
And so I think every agency needs to have some reflection on, okay, yep, we're collecting all this data, but so what? How is this making us more efficient, more responsible with taxpayer dollars, whatever? What is the value proposition of all the data we're gathering? You know, gathering data for data's sake, I would offer, is a very expensive waste of effort.
Yeah. Yeah. So what does, we actually have an episode on asset management that we'll dive into a little deeper on this, and we'll have multiple episodes on asset management, I'm sure. But just, you know, in 60 seconds, what do you guys use at Crystal for asset management?
So we use Infomap, which is basically an interface with the Esri backbone for stuff. And really the intent for us is really focus on our staff out in the field. Their access to record drawings, their access to our GIS layers. So when they're doing maintenance, they can track it. When they're doing locates, it's easy information at their fingertip. And really just acknowledging the fact they're in the field. So what is the information they need at their fingertips to be as efficient as possible, to have the right information, to get the job done and move on to the next one, because we know that list is never getting shorter.
Do you have a looping process when they find something's wrong out in the field?
Yep. So the way this system works is if they do note an issue, there's a red line feature, so they can just mark it up. And then when they sync, that information gets pushed over to our GIS person who can make the edit and then push it back through the system. And so, you know, you look at the old days with paper, our turnaround time was 6 months to a year. And now it literally could be a few days.
Yeah.
I mean, theoretically it could be closer, but within a few days, because we don't do cellular for our data because of my concern about if that goes down. If this system is useless, that is not a risk I can take. And for me, Joplin is a very, you know, when you've lost everything, all your waypoints, intersections, how do you navigate in that space to find your curb stops, to find your valves? And so for me, that's something that I think about as we make decisions on asset management software.
So any last question, probably wrap up. Any lessons learned the hard way on implementing technology, software? I mean, this being offline, is that come from a lesson where like, oh no, we are offline, or anything else?
So thankfully, no, it doesn't come from a hard lesson other than just random things not working through the course of the job. But it's really an awareness of what that might be. So as far as like lessons learned the hard way, I'm hoping to avoid that one of a really expensive paperweight. I would say on a bigger scale is caring about your staff and each other is the most important thing, and building trust within an organization. So we talk about mental health, we talk about physical health, we talk about emotional health, and that is something people need to invest in themselves in, because that manifests in a lot of other ways. And so if we're talking about emergency management and building trust and communication, if you're not taking care of yourself, it's really hard to open that communication and have trust with your first responder counterparts. If you're a supervisor or director and you're not taking care of yourself, you're not taking care of your people, and that's your core job. That stuff plays into your decision making, right? If you're not getting enough sleep, you're making bad decisions. That matters. And so when you talk about just preparedness and building a culture of success, it's okay to pause, to look at yourself and make sure you're taking care of yourself first.
Yeah, great lesson.
And if you're not, get help, because
Yeah.
it's okay and it's normal and you're not weird.
Yeah, it is okay to ask for help, absolutely. Well, hey, thanks a lot, Mark.
Glad
this
to be
was great.
here.
Really
Appreciate
enjoyed it.
It's always fun.
Yeah,
Yep.
this is awesome.
Check out my YouTube video, How to Drive Like a Minnesotan.
Oh yeah, do that. Yeah, just do a quick plug on that.
One of the things that I've done over the years as for mental health or just for my own enjoyment is I have a dash cam. And because I drive a lot, you know, I have 3 girls, and so I'm just basically like a giant dad Uber. And so I have a dash cam, and so I've collected videos as I'm out driving of people just making poor decisions while driving. The other reason for that is I have a daughter who will be driving soon. I thought, what better way to educate her what to watch for than to have like a large library of bad drivers. And so I started a YouTube page, How to Drive Like a Minnesotan. Check it out. Watch some videos. Like and subscribe, or not. I really don't care.
So how
It's
many
funny.
times have you caught yourself doing something not so smart?
I don't put
Mr.
those
Ray?
videos on. That's not fair. I actually had one close call that I put on there because it was a really good teachable moment.
Good.
Awesome.
Good.
Thanks,
All right.
Mark.
Thanks again, Mark.